Right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for joining us, Mark Evans. Welcome aboard. How are you doing?
I am frazzled, if I'm honest with you. If anybody's got an extensible stick they can poke me with, I've spent the day training people on computer auditing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, I've got sort of weapon strength coffee just to keep me going. But yeah, so looking forward to this. Looking forward to being put on the spot.
Good man, Mark. Good man. Thank you for joining us. So for those of you that have not been on one of our calls before, once the presentation starts, if you've got any sort of feedback in your rooms, just put yourself on mute. For now, I'm going to introduce Mark. Mark's former CIO. I was looking at your accreditations online, Mark, and I don't think I've seen somebody with so many, accreditations associated to just cybersecurity. And you're getting, this is a continual thing for you, getting more and more accreditation, but you've had some frustrations recently, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There are certain cybersecurity certification companies who aren't worth their rent, if I'm honest with you. And as an introduction to fellow attendees to this, I've become something of, I use this term quite a bit, and it's true, something of polemicist about this, where I'm so fed up with poor service, with poor attitudes, that I call it out as I see it, and people either like it or they don't. So if you've got that proddy stick to keep me awake and I suddenly feel myself getting smashed over the head, I'll know that I've probably touched a raw nerve with some of you guys.
Mark, listen, thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Just to give people a little bit of background on Mark, he's a failed chef and West Brom born, a Liverpool fan, which I'll let you off for, because one of your best mates growing up was a very famous footballer, certainly in my day, and judging by the hairlines of some of our attendees, maybe everyone will know who he is. Do you want to tell us about your claim to fame, shall we say, Mark?
You loaded that. I was going to just answer to say, oh yeah, Cristiano Ronaldo. However, he's a contemporary. I used to play football in the team with Lee Sharp, who played for Man United and occasionally for England. So yeah, obviously I was a midfield general, or potentially defence. I said yesterday, Razor Ruddock, but probably big and round and wanders around the ground. So yeah, played for a while.
Mark, thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate it. We've had a number of chats over the last few months, really, about your experience, your background. Obviously, we're trying to partner with you and helping you find new clients. Cybersecurity, I guess over the last kind of 5-10 years, the role has just kind of grown and grown and grown, and we were talking and waxing lyrical about this, but I think something like between 2018 and 2019, the amount of reported cybersecurity breaches increased by 54%. So that's just in the last, a 12-month period recently, and that's largely down to the fact that there's just more places for people to attack, and it's more in our subconscious now that people can steal our data, and that's a hack, that's a threat, and companies need to be aware of it. And that's why organizations really do need to invest properly when it comes to cyber. So is that does that marry up with what you've seen certainly in the last few years?
Totally. I mean, the thing. All right, guys, full of admission here. I cut my teeth in NetWare 3.11. So that gives you an idea of the sort of scale of time we're talking about. And at that point, hacking into a network was sci-fi. I think there was War Games, the movie around that time, and that was just a real sci-fi explanation of what hacking was. But as we come to rely more and more on the internet, and and the services that provides, it also provides a rich ground we hold dear and our businesses, making that separation there. And it just seems to be increasing. The attack vectors are growing exponentially. We're inviting strangers into our networks to give us money or to buy services. And there's a whole sort of issue around potentially credibility with some people who work in cybersecurity. They're seen as the nerds. But also in terms of professionalism. And I think that part of the presentation is I think that we're in a situation now where we have a very immature solution for a mature set of circumstances, and it needs organisational. This isn't kit. I'm not talking about kit. My company sells kit, and we sell services, but I'm not looking to sort of pat myself on the back and say, I'm a CISO and I should have this and I should have that. This is based on experience with our clients and saying there's a disconnect here and things aren't operating properly. It's about time that we really matured in our approach to cybersecurity, because there are people out there on the internet who are doing things that, aren't being communicated to the top decision makers in the business in a way that they can understand as a business issue rather than a challenge to cybersecurity, which is completely alien to them.
Thank you, Mark. I think that sets it up quite nicely. So the format for today is as we've done in previous events, where Mark's got a presentation. We're going to go through that about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. And please all feel free to make notes and ask questions in the chat if you want to. You can digitally raise your hand. And at the end, we can all unmute ourselves while we ask some questions to Mark. So without further ado, Mark, I'm going to just give me a nod every time you want to go to the next slide. Okay. And we'll probably rattle through this in about 20-25 minutes, if that's okay.
You're hoping. No, we'll get.
All right, lovely. Cheers, Mark. And I'll just give me a nod when you want me to move on to the next slide. Okay.
Well, it'll be line by line because I did the presentation line by line. So yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So, bit of a contentious title, but that can be a two-way thing. Dreams of superiority. We'll touch on that as we go through. Next slide, please, Sam. So the role of the CISO pre-pandemic. We all know this. Plan, deploy, maintain protection systems and services. Manage a team, build and develop a team. Deal with incidents of varying impact and complexity. And plan, achieve and maintain compliance with various standards and frameworks. So ISO, NIST, ISCI, Cyber Essentials even. Next slide, please. The perception of cybersecurity pre-pandemic with the geeks: disrespected, slovenly, often underfunded, begrudging agreements to budget. And I've seen it. These are all things that I have seen. You want how much? How likely is that to happen? And there's been a disconnect between the CISO and people in the senior management team, because there are certain tools and approaches I think are missing from a number of CISOs. These are people who typically, large percentage, have been promoted through the ranks and they've almost been thrown the CISO title. It's always quite painful. I went in to support a CISO during a budget meeting, and it was insulting to me, and I wasn't even the CISO. So all right, then we'll let you have the money, but how likely is that to happen? Well, fairly likely. And if it does happen, pardon the expression, we're all screwed. There wasn't the skill set there to sort of put that into a compelling business argument. You guys have probably all had somebody who set up 2 computers at home and is suddenly massively aware of corporate cybersecurity and networking. But you will get people who say, well, why are you doing that? Why has the password got to be that long? You know what? I haven't got a password at home. It's not a problem, and it's just noise in the day-to-day environment. Often seen as an overhead or a busybody, rarely an enabler. And I think this is because we've got an issue where of the location of the cart and the horse, which I'll come on to later, and often bypassed. Sam, is this Chatham House?
It can be Chatham House.
Yeah,
Mark, I just don't know what you're going to say, but yeah, go for it.
I'm not going to mention any organisations. I have NDAs and God knows what to support that, but it's typically marketing people who try and bypass cybersecurity.
Okay.
We've seen an opportunity.
We're throwing marketing people under the bus today, are we?
Oh yeah, for a start.
Okay.
If we don't implement this new marketing system, which a friend of mine has written, we're going to lose millions. Which the CEO says, lose millions? Cybersecurity people, get that working now. I know this sounds like an outlier, but I have seen variations on that to greater or lesser extents. Cybersecurity people are presented with a fait accompli. They've just got to make sure it ticks all the boxes for cybersecurity. It's not the best way for these things to happen. Next slide, please, Sam. However, pandemic, this changed. There were potentially huge changes in operations around home working, lockdown, furlough of staff, people who legally could not access systems if they're on furlough because the company would be fined. It would be a fraudulent activity. Things were coming into the business that probably hadn't been there before. The predominance of Zoom.
We're on it now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A year ago, how many people were using Zoom? But in the absence of a valid, viable, free video conference facility, Zoom suddenly came in and filled that gap, and it put a lot of cybersecurity on the people on the back foot. We've seen that there are issues around the security with Zoom, and people who are using it as a free resource will find it out to their distaste on some occasions about the lack of security within Zoom. But it was a tool that was used and needed within the business. And again, fait accompli, cybersecurity people deal with this. Oh, great. Huge potential supply chain disruption. I'm not talking about goods there. I'm talking about if you needed new equipment to support your new operating environment, chances are that your suppliers might be on furlough. I'm not going to mention any names, but one organisation, their prices suddenly seem to be a lot more than they've been previously.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot, haven't we?
Absolutely. And when you're in a situation where every penny you want to spend as a CISO is begrudgingly given, and you then have to come back and say, right, the operating environment's changed, we need this, and it was in the budget at £10,000, it's now £17,500. It doesn't put the security environment in a very good light. And it's not a matter that the CISO or the information security manager, cybersecurity manager can really justify. You can only wave the flag of cashing in so often. And we had more vectors for attack. We had people working from home, potentially in environments which traditionally, sorry, the cat's crying to get out. Yeah. This is a live session, guys. We're in an environment where we got Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and we were having to juggle that. We, as an organisation, were being called because teams were being pulled from pillar to post because they had systems which people needed to access to keep the business running, but around which they hadn't built an external security wrapper. And even the spend on that was begrudged. Come on to that later. But the thing is, we're now in a situation where we've got a compelling requirement to make sure that our security of processing is on point. Very few organisations don't process personal data and therefore don't come under GDPR. And we know the fines. You're looking at 2% of global turnover. You're looking at potential €10 million fine. So all of a sudden, the CISO has got some real skin in the game. You know, they are beholden to potential fines. They need to make the case of spending the money. And that has been since pre-pandemic, through mid-pandemic, and obviously will carry on post-pandemic. But the perception around CISOs and their teams changed to the point where they became seen as almost like goalkeepers, not letting the bad guys through. A little respect started to creep in. However, funding was either less because the company wasn't selling anything, they were in absolute lockdown and they were wondering where the next tranche of money was going to come from, or more when senior managers realised that they'd been getting a real cheap meal before and now they needed to stump up because they'd underfunded cybersecurity all along. A growing dialogue between stakeholders. You get team managers saying to the cybersecurity team, I could use my staff working off site at home. What do we need to do? How do we get them on board? How do we get them configured? What happens if they don't know how to set up their work computer with broadband or to access our systems? The cybersecurity teams established their value very quickly in that environment because they had to almost turn the oil tank around in a very, very small radius. Because I don't know about you guys, but it seemed that one day you were working fine, the next day it was right, we're on lockdown. And a lot of people are like, what do I do? Cybersecurity, these are the guys that were being, suddenly their value went up because they could deal with this, hopefully, in the face of an immediate requirement that came completely out of left field. However, they were still bypassed on occasion. A number of senior security managers that I've come across have said that the prevalence of using Zoom, which wasn't on the corporate radar, presence of the use of apps on phones started to kick in. So people are adopting Slack and they're adopting Trello or whatever it is, things that weren't on the corporate asset list. But they're still bypassed. Next slide, please. Then. Post-pandemic, it's an open road. Some organisations have seen seismic shift in how they operate. Now, I may be oversharing here, but my father worked in a factory. He was an unskilled labourer in a factory. And as far as I understand, his job was to put a piece of metal in a machine, press a button and get a bent piece of metal out. Home working, I would suggest, is probably not something that would ever have been within the gift of the company to provide to him. But a lot of people have been working from home where ordinarily they wouldn't. More use of mobile technology. My partner's an estate agent and she had to work off her phone for a few days while they got everything in place for her to work from home, which is quite odd. But organisations are grasping on the coattails of innovation that's been forced on them by circumstance. It's the first pandemic I know of. However, just as a brief aside, we were warned a few years ago about avian flu and none of the lessons were learned, and that speaks volumes about the lack of respect that was given to cybersecurity people and HR, but I'm not interested in them. There were risks, there were opportunities. You know, we need to have in place a model whereby if people can't mingle, they can still work. And the lessons of avian flu were such that I've been into organisations where if they were confronted with a meteorite incident, their business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan would be perfect. When was the last time any facility was hit by a meteorite? I can't think of one. But within the last 5 years, we've had the threat of a global pandemic and no lessons were learned, and cybersecurity people were bypassed. They were ignored. Oh, you just want more funds. No, we want to put a flag in the ground so that we know that this actually manifests itself next year, not necessarily avian flu. Then we've got some policies, we've got some spend available that we can take forward and address having to turn the oil tank around within a very tight radius, which is what has had to happen. Some organisations have had to seriously reflect on their risk appetite. There is you could potentially have a workforce which no longer sits within the confines of four walls on a known network, within a known operating environment, possibly with known endpoints. If they're using their home PC and using a terminal session or whatever, using email on their home PC, the security requirements have changed, and cybersecurity people are expected to lap it up. There are further unprecedented vectors for attack, plus ça change. And there you go, Sam. Your normal just popped up for you.
Who had 5 or 10 minutes 30 before we talked about the new normal? Thank you for that, Mark.
But we've still got the Article 32 security processing. We're potentially allowing personal data, which is, it's a real elephant in the room. We're potentially allowing that data to appear on personal devices purely through expediency, because we weren't prepared for a pandemic. I don't think anybody could be, really. We're introducing so much risk into the organisation, and ultimately the head on the block is the CISO. Next slide, please, sir. However, one thing that has been quite gratifying is one or two conversations I've had, typically over Zoom or Teams, because nobody's invited me into their offices anymore. I don't know whether that's a personal thing or whether it is just a response to COVID. Is there's almost a sort of Damascene conversion in that cybersecurity teams are seen to be quite professional. They've taken everything that has been thrown at them, and with very few exceptions, they've managed to mitigate risk to the point where the business hasn't gone over as a result of a cybersecurity threat. They seem to be deserving of respect, and it's a newfound respect, and it's not even a begrudging respect now. I was walking through a corridor of a large organisation with their information security manager, somebody who I implicitly respect. Is fantastic, and we stopped and we were talking, and the IT director came over, and I was introduced, and I don't think it was for show, but he said, "You know what, person," to the CISO, you really saved our bacon there. I had real worries that we weren't going to be able to. That's on my machine. I beg your pardon. Something's popped up. We had real problems pitching our way forward through this, and we really thought that we were going to lose a large part of our processing, a large part of our business operations, not the business itself. You guys have pulled our fat out of the fire. Stakeholder management, because all of a sudden these are the saviours, these are the professionals, and they start to be seen as an enabler because they've been tested and they've delivered. Oh crikey, I've got to move this team out of these offices. They need to work from home. What can we do? On one or two occasions, it's been quite nice that the CISO has been able to put in place tacitly protections and say, well, log in. That's all you need to do. We've got you covered. And that has really established some of the cybersecurity teams, or IT security teams, at a higher level than they have been before, because they've been tested and they've been proven to deliver. And they are now regularly consulted. I'm looking to do this. Now, whether that's a habit that will die off as familiarity starts to breed contempt again, I don't know. But I think it's a time like this that we need to start to snatch the initiative for people who operate such a vital component of our businesses. So I'm not a CISO myself. I'm a third party looking at what's going on, and these are my observations. So next slide, please. The rate of pace of change has increased. The business strategy may have changed considerably. May have a new operating model. I know some companies that don't envisage ever going back to an office again. Maybe market forces involved in this, in that if you had a particularly sort of open armed approach to inviting people into your offices, they may not want to do that anymore. They may see that as old-fashioned, but you need to engage with them either through Zoom or Teams or whatever, but also make sure it's secure, because the last thing you want to do is invite somebody to a meeting and then somehow leave them with malware on the machine. It doesn't work very well. And reputational maintenance. You know, we have flexed. We have faced this problem. We've dealt with it. You can rely on us, rather than, oh hell, we're in trouble, can you call back next week? However, the landscape has changed, because we do have bad actors, malign actors, for whom this is a complete challenge as well. You know, oh, okay, so everybody's working from home. Where are the risks for that business then? Can we do a DDoS attack on their main point of ingress for their staff, stop their business from working? And these things will be tested. Your phishing, your anti-malware, all the rest of it will be tested as time goes on, because you don't have that corporate environment where somebody's metaphorically leaning over your shoulder. And your cybersecurity teams have got to keep that in mind. What used to work well for us may no longer be acceptable. You know, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you on a video conference because we're not allowed. It's seen as a risk. May not be functional. You know, if your entire operating environment is predicated on being on a LAN segment in a building, chances are it's not going to work. You're in a situation where you've got people who may turn down the opportunity to return to work because they've got loved ones who are at risk and they can't enter into an environment, regardless of the rule of 6 or whatever the hell the rule is this week. They're not going to put their life and the life of the loved ones at risk. And that means that they are essentially moving themselves out to an environment where they can work. Not their fault, but then that leads to rehiring and all the rest of it. It's not functional. Or it's entirely unsuitable. One company has, since opening the floodgates, metaphorically, on video conferencing, they found that their salespeople engagement with their customers has gone through the roof. They've built stronger relationships. There is an element of, I suppose, the Dunkirk spirit, for want of a better term, where you can commiserate with someone outside of the environment in which you operate, and it builds a stronger sort of relationship. These are good things. These are what people want. And so, you know, having a rule that says, oh no, you can only have a video conference through a video conference suite, which used to be the case in some organisations, it's not suitable in the new normal. Next slide, please, Sam. Right, this is a relationship between the CIO and the CISO, or the CTO and the CISO. It seems to be a particularly strange environment where any advice given by the CISO has to be filtered through a CIO or a CTO. It leads to, I'm sorry guys, if you're doing Chatham House, I don't know what the modern terminology is on this, and the only way I can put it is probably quite racially tempered. But have you heard the term Chinese whispers?
We all have, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the modern terminology is, and I hate to cause offence. But in the First World War, you'd have a message passed down the line, send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And once it had been passed through intermediaries and corrupted, with no agenda, just happened, mishearing or whatever, you get to send 3 and 4 pence, we're going to advance. Why we have that situation? Sorry, if that explains that to you now, Sam, you're sitting there thinking, what the hell's this guy talking about? Why there is this intermediary between the CISO and the board now, which is the CIO, I really can't understand. I dealt with one situation where this had become quite political, and the CIO, CTO, one of them, saw every suggestion and recommendation that was being made by the CISO based on best practice that was coming from the likes of NCSC or NIST or whoever as a personal attack on their, professional attack on their capability. There is no way you can protect the business if everything has to go through the filter of an intermediary. And I think over the last few months, we've seen an accelerated move to a position where a CISO has built a robust case for them to be elevated to the board. to have that input. Having an intermediary of a CIO, IT director, CTO between the board and somebody who's protecting that organisation against threat is like driving a car and painting the driver's side of the windscreen black and it getting the passenger to say when to turn left or right. It's not safe. It's not something you can really operate for. Oh, you've gone too far, I think so. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I'm back.
Creating or maintain, not creating, they've always been there, but maintain. And bear in mind, I come from a CIO background, so am I a turkey voting for Christmas? I don't know. What I'm saying is that functionality has moved ahead, and the CIO should be at the top table, protecting the business from risks right at the outset. And as I say here, our senior managers so jealous of the keys to the executive boardroom. Why is there this artificial barrier for someone who's operating such a vital service? Why are they not being welcomed more readily onto a board? There are some, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is an absolute, but they're few and far between. It seems it's either a CIO, CTO, or nothing, or it gets rolled into a chief risk officer. That's to me, that's too wide a playing field. These people, some of my best friends are CISOs. No, these people deserve that input at the top level. And the point there about paying peanuts, you get monkeys. These people have developed skills that need to be encouraged and used. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else. And you may not be as well provided for the next pandemic. And sorry, that might sound entirely negative, the next pandemic, but if you read around about deforestation, chances are we're going to have another pandemic, and it won't be COVID-19. Could be something else. Next slide, please, then. So the role of CISO, the maturity, I would suggest that they should be on the senior management board. Report to the CEO, not through the CFO, not through the CIO. They should have the same link to the seat of power as any of those. But they need to be developed as an all-round business person. And I mentioned at the outset, one of the challenges is, begrudging allowance in budget. And part of the problem is that a lot of these CISOs, because they have been promoted through the ranks from possibly the help desk all the way through, haven't had an opportunity to develop these skills. They need to be an internal salesperson. They need to be able to look at the security in the context of the business as it's discussed to give their input, rather than going through a CIO who says the board wants to do this. What do you think? The CISO comes back and says, you know what? You're lighting the blue touch paper, could have all sorts of problems. And the CIO being in a position where politically it's not in their best interest to go back and give the plain text news to the board. It needs somebody there who can put that across with soft skills. They can be brought in for innovation, develop skills around entrepreneurialism. One guy, strategy contributor, absolutely. One guy I dealt with, it was just absolute joy when somebody came to a marketing person and said, I'd like to be able to do this, but with COVID and whatever, I'm not sure if I can. And this guy just said, well, yeah, of course you can. That's in place. We've got that ready for you. If you want to flick that switch now, we're protecting you. But again, that's after the fact. This is something that we've done that nobody's been bothered to listen to us about or come and ask us about until now. They can be a strategy contributor. How many times have you seen, supposing you guys have all sat on boards or executive boards, how many times have you seen a situation where somebody said, oh, we'd quite like to do this? And somebody else on the board said, well, yeah, that's easy. Is that the limit of the extent of what you're trying to achieve? Because we can take this a lot further. We could ramp this up and make it something really good. We're missing the people who can actually make that happen and control our security perspective and control our security environment to make sure that all of the bad things don't happen. They can open the gates to innovation. They can look from the top level at the operation of the business and say, you know what, spot fix here means that all of a sudden we can open our market wider. We can go to a different demographic. We've got everything covered. And drive privacy and security by design from the top of the organization. When you have your senior security person who is sitting somewhere in middle management, they haven't got any establishment to go and say to someone else at their level, what you're doing is potentially illegal under GDPR, or it exposes us to a lot of risk. You need to change your ways because the responsibility, you're not the boss of me. So then the security person is, if they're male, emasculated and has to go back to their point of authority, which is the CIO, potentially, CTO, IT director, whichever it may be, and almost be seen to, Dad, they weren't playing nicely, and that destroys credibility. You know, why put someone who holds the security of your organization in the position where they're seen as someone who can't fight their own battles? They don't have responsibility from a board position to say, no, this can't happen, this is breaking the law. You might think it's a fantastic solution, but stop, we need to look at this and come at it from a different direction. Rather than, no, but I'll go and make sure that somebody else ticks the box and lets me tell you that you can't do it. That's ridiculous. Next slide, please, Sam. Oh, yeah, and I'll just touch on that. So, there's a weird psychology, and this comes back to dreams of superiority. There's a weird psychology within cybersecurity, within the CISO environment. This will deliver pictures touch by touch, Sam, so you're probably worthwhile just clicking the button.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't put them all on screen at the same time. Okay.
Let me see if I can go back.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. It's not a problem. All the animation that I've put in place. Don't worry about that.
There you go. It's happening now, Mark. It's happening.
That was worth the wait, wasn't it, guys? The perception of the CISO, are they an all-powerful deity? Well, no, they're not. And I don't think many would seek to be that. Are they a superhero? I'm so glad that I could get a picture from the boys with a male and a female superhero.
I was just going to say, I've just started watching that program, and it's, for those of you that haven't watched it, you should watch it. It's like, sorry to digress and jump in here, it's a bit like what Game of Thrones is to The Hobbit, and I'll just leave it at that. But it's well worth the watch. Sorry, continue, Mark.
No, it's fine. I wait with rapt attention, waiting for it to come out. But are they a superhero? Well, potentially they are seen that way slightly now because they've managed to pull a business through an unforeseen it's largely unforeseen pandemic. But also, are they a supplicant, having to go on hands and knees to the board to say, all the good work I've done, or my team's done, preferably, can you back that up now with a bit more money, please? We need to do this. It's a really weird psychology. And I do feel for people who operate in this role, and I do think that they're being underserved. Next slide, please, Sam. In fact, it will be. Is there a better psychology? Yes, there is. A business person. They see their role within the organisation as driving the business forward, in the same way that the marketing CMO drives the business forward, hopefully. The chief financial officer drives the business forward. The CISO is your backstop. They're your goalkeeper. Going back to the football analogy, they are your Neville Southall. Having seen the photos of him recently, he probably blocked the goal anyway. They deserve a place on the top table. Absolutely. Next slide, please, Sam. So, in conclusion, I'm hoping I have kept this to a reasonable amount of time.
You certainly have, Mark.
Oh, good. This isn't the last time we may face global issues within our business. Brexit is bearing down on us at a rate of knots, even if we have to break the law to do it. Next button, please, Sam. What about COVID-20? We're dealing with COVID-19. What about COVID-20? Rising sea levels present a risk. I know that sounds crazy, but if your data center is somewhere on the East Coast and it looks like it's starting to fall, you need somebody on your site to make sure that you've dealt with that. Issues around mass immigration and civil unrest. These are all threats to businesses. I've seen this myself where, fortunately, it wasn't my business, but I was talking to a supplier and they had a client whose data center was in Liverpool Street Station when there were threats of bomb attacks and nobody could get into their data center, and all of a sudden, you know, any on-site protection, any on-site management couldn't happen. Civil unrest featured in there. We are going into an environment of unknown unknowns with the person who protects our corporate assets in the computer environment answering to a CIO. They must be at the top table to ensure efficiency of change, security by design, and to inform other senior stakeholders of any horizon scanning which may impact the business. Drip feed that information in so they don't turn up on a Monday morning and say, oh, by the way, we've been invaded by Martians. You know, there's a surprise for you. Oh, and I would like a blank check. Thank you very much. They can drip feed this in. It enables the organisation to develop a maturity around the information they're receiving and not to begrudgingly set forward a budget and say, is that what you want? Is that too much? Is that enough? They understand the context in which that request is being made and the planning for the next financial year. And they're being sold how this could be an enabler to the business, which typically a CIO can't do. They have different fish to fry. Next button, please, Sam. Needs to be more rounded. The role needs to be more rounded, including business acumen, internal and external sales skills. The reason why I brought that up is we sell tools to security teams. We have security teams that we know may be struggling. Their budget is being absolutely decimated, means 1 in 10. It's been annihilated more so. Now, we make a reasonable margin on the sale of services and goods into those companies. But with the exception of one person, nobody's come to us and said, guys, we're struggling. Is there anything we can do about the fees that we're being charged? Is there anything we can do about the cost of the services that we need? And I understand the business reason why they would want to change. And I wouldn't welcome everybody coming and asking me to cut down on the fees, because obviously it's money out of my business's pocket. But there isn't even that perspective from people. They have no business acumen, or they appear to have no business acumen, or they're not allowed to have business acumen or any sales skills to sort of start to renegotiate any contracts or any services we have in place. Now, I'm not in the position where I'm going to go and unilaterally say, guys, guess what? We can knock so many £1,000 off this service. Until they ask. That would be just cutting your own throat. You wouldn't do it. But the people who are buying these services don't feel empowered to do it. They potentially don't have the skills to do it. They're not a business person. And I refer back to the earliest shot of when cybersecurity people are seen as geeks and they're all sitting around in sweatshirts with a lanyard around their neck. As daft as it sounds, having a CISO with a professional image, which lends gravitas to the delivery of information to senior stakeholders, is a learned behaviour. Now, I'm not saying they've got to go to Savile Row and buy a suit and a shirt and tie, but a lot of the CISOs or senior IT security managers, should we say, that we deal with, they're lovely people. I haven't got an axe to grind. Some of them don't have very good people skills, but they are fantastic with kit. But typically, they are the sort of people who you trust, but perhaps wouldn't want to put in front of senior management. And so perhaps that's why the link between the board and the CISO is facilitated by the CIO. But this is all behaviours and attitudes that can be learned and taught. But until we give that opportunity, until we give security of our services, the respect that it requires, by elevating that role to the levers of power, we're not going to see any change. And the next time we have this kind of issue, they may not be able to turn the oil tank around fast enough to save the business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Brilliant. That really enjoyed that. And you certainly said that you would be you wouldn't be pulling any punches, and you certainly didn't. I'm going to ask whether anybody would like to ask any questions. So feel free to take yourself off mute. And yeah, I think first of all, I was just going to say, I mean, the timing of this is why now? Do you think, Mark, is this change needed?
We are in a position where we've had a cold, not even a dash of cold water in the face. We've been absolutely thrown a bucket of cold seawater, which smells, and we don't want to deal with it. And you could say that this is a black swan situation. Nobody expected COVID-19. Lots of people still deny it. I'm looking at you, Noel Gallagher. But this isn't the only thing that, if you're doing any kind of horizon scanning about potential threats and you pay any interest to news, regardless of your opinions on Brexit, I'm not looking for a political debate, that will cause a challenge. There will be a challenge that comes from Brexit, one way or another. And we've still got an environment where everything is channeled through a CIO, CTO, IT director. We have to be in a position where, I keep talking about turning around the oil tanker. In the past, we could allow that oil tanker to turn around in a radius of 30 miles. Didn't matter. We haven't got that luxury anymore. We need somebody who has their hands on the levers of power within an organisation, not to go on an ego trip or a power trip, but to be able to cut through a communication channel which shouldn't exist. We have a level of communication which now shouldn't exist because we don't have the luxury of time to deal with Brexit, a new pandemic potentially. There's some really worrying stuff if you read a lot of the ecological news. Mass migration. When we're looking at a situation where in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, where I spent a long time, believe me, it's bloody hot. They're looking at a situation where their local temperatures will be unlivable for humans. It causes a displacement, it causes a ripple effect. Those people, you can't blame them. They will want to come to the West. And rightly or wrongly, that will present a situation where, if you look at some of the characters that are around in the news today, they won't be happy to accept that. It will cause civil unrest. And we need to be in a situation where we're not just looking at the logical attacks that can happen, man in the middle attacks. Oh, can't you tell I was doing an audit course today? Phishing attacks. We're talking about physical assaults on operating environments that need to fall on somebody's remit at the board, and it can't just be a facilities manager.
I think you make a really good point. I mean, I guess we're glibly listening to you talking about these things that you think, well, that's surely not going to happen. But we as a CISO, you've got to look for these black swan events, haven't you? So I'm going to put it out to the floor, and I'm going to drop you in it again, Andy Flack. I can always count on you to give us your opinion.
Thank you.
What's been, what do you take from the presentation there from Mark, and does a lot of that ring bells with you?
What I took from it, Sam, apart from the fact that it meant that you're going to drop me in it again, was I realised that cats generally are managing to become Zoom aware, and everybody I've spoken to today on Zoom has been attacked by a cat. So it's convergent ecology, maybe. I don't know. I was thinking actually that what we need to have is an environment whereby you don't have to retrofit security. It should be part of you've got to do that normally. Yeah. So you've actually, in order for you to be able to launch this service on the system, has it gone through the security guys yet? Are they happy with it? No, you haven't taken it to them. You haven't got their approval. Go back and do that then, right? So that if you have a CIO or a CTO who's actually saying, you've got to do it this way, guys, all right? This is the person who you talk to figure out how you get your housekeeping done and how it gets done and how make sure we're all happy. Yeah. Then you don't get the issue of, you know, please can you make sure that the system is fixed properly, and please can I have some software which helps me do it, because that is part of the process. It's like you've got to do QA. All right. Part of the QA process is it secure? Have you actually got a system that meets all of the requirements? Is it GDPR compliant? What are you going to do if this happens? What are you going to do if that happens? You know, that attitude has got to come from the top down. I agree. You know, you need to have somebody in the C-suite who's actually saying security isn't optional. It's mandatory. It is a minimum entry requirement for this process. Yeah. And we've got to have it in place because there will be a resurgence. There will be a local lockdown. You will have something which means that those guys can go to work. Those guys can't go to work. Those guys are working on stuff from home on BOYD, and they're actually got to have some security there to make sure that they're not being compromised through that channel, right? Because we are opening our attack face up. And those ones over there are in our nice little bunker somewhere. Oh, when you spoke about actually people who had a disaster plan for being hit by a meteorite, okay, it actually made me remember that the Automobile Association, when they built their new CDC, corporate data center, many years ago, they decided they were going to build the two halves of it, which were duplicate halves, more than the wingspan of a jumbo jet apart, right? Because they said that way we should be okay. I then wasn't very popular when I said to them, that does rely on the jumbo jet coming in that way and not coming in that way, because otherwise you're screwed. That and the fact that all of the people who know how the system works will be in that CDC. And if that one gets wiped out, it doesn't matter if you've got all the kit, you won't know how to run it. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of people actually think that security is important until such time as they want to get some work done. Yeah, like your marketing officer or whatever. And we've all had that situation where you want to get something done, it won't install on your system. What do? You disable the antivirus so that you can get the beep thing installed. Yeah. Because, or, you know, or even if you're using Teams on a Linux desktop, yeah, and you've got to go and run it under sudo in order to get it to run, you know, things like that. So, yeah, I'm fully on board with everything you were saying there, but my thought was this should be coming down automatically from the C-suite anyway. You know, why isn't it? Wake up, guys. You know, this, if you want to have a system which is actually going to be able to react to events, you've got to be prepared for it, not trying to retrofit it afterwards. Yeah. So sorry, Sam, was that enough?
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you. But what you say there sounds, it makes sense, but clearly Mark's got his finger in the air because it doesn't happen. That's your frustration, right?
It is, and just to dive in, to come back to what Andrew's talking about, if you're in a situation where there's a tension, not attention, a tension between someone in sales or marketing or any of those trivial departments, any of those departments, and they're putting pressure on the CIO to deliver because there's a market opportunity slipping away, the CIO may be the very channel that ignores the security. Oh, we're fine, we're covered. You know, and I think
it has to be in part of the culture. Like I said, if the CIO is happy to say, "Oh yeah, we don't have to do any QA on this. Yeah, we can just let it go in with bugs in it, and just, you know, we'll push it off to customer services to clear up the mess afterwards." Then put them on the phones for a while. Okay, you know, make sure that they actually understand what the problem is. You know, go and clear that mess up yourself now, and now come back and say, "Oh no, we don't actually have to do that." Yeah, I mean, I've just wrote an article on LinkedIn about you know, be kind to your customer service staff, because there are so many things where it just gets off to customer services to just clear up the mess afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, and the way out of that is, you put your CEO or your CTO or your marketing officer or whoever on the customer service desk and say, right, you just answer the phones for a while. You just take it on, you know, sort that out. And then, you know, a few minutes later, it'll be, okay, point taken. Yeah, all right, we'll do this instead. And I think what COVID's done is it's given them a bite on the fundament, which basically means that, yeah, I now have that on my radar. I'm now aware of it because that hurt. You know, we've got to try and keep that going. Yeah. So it is actually always there as you've got to make sure that you've done this before you try and do that. Yeah. Don't go out without your trousers on, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think the issue that I see around that is that whilst it's prevalent and at the forefront of everyone's mind, people will do that. But once we get back to whatever the new normal, he said using the fingers, is, once we get back to what new normal is, those things start to recede. Bit like, going further. No, I'm not looking at you, Andrew. Don't
Sorry, Sam. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, okay. Nigel, you can,
You rearrange the lights on you, Sam. Please rearrange the lights.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll go close to the camera. What's everyone else's
skin in the game? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Give other people a chance.
What's everyone else's opinions and what sort of everyone else's kind of experiences with this?
Sam, can I ask a question, please?
Of course, Damian, yes.
I work for a government organisation as a non-executive director. How can I familiarise myself with the risks and challenges that people who deal with cybersecurity are dealing with, so I can ask the right questions of the chief executive and the accountable officers?
To my mind, that's a conversation that you need to have directly with that individual who bears that responsibility. What are your challenges? In an ideal world, what would you have? In a real world, what would you have? Because in an ideal world, we all have unlimited budget and we can just drop spot solutions in and it's all great. What top 3 things can you do that would change our security perspective and provide a level of security that you can quantify and qualify? Any more than three, and you're just invited a shopping list, and you'll never get anyone's buy-in.
Okay.
I would suggest that you actually ask the questions about: are we secure? What would happen if we had a breach? What would be our reputational damage? What would be the cost? You know, do we want to become the next talk or what?
Yeah. There's a situation in Wales going on at the moment where a major data breach has happened, and I think it's going to call a lot of government organisations into question about how they do things when people aren't actually there to respond. So I actually think data security officers are actually going to become round the clock people that have got to be on call rather than just in office hours.
Well, they always have been, because, you know, when the shit hits the fan, somebody's got to clear it up. And, you know, if it's a security issue, I mean, I was at a company annual event when a phone call came through, and it was, okay, walk over to the seniors in various parts of the thing, said, we've had an issue, we've had an issue, we've had an issue. Such and such is dealing with it. He'll come back to us. We've got to make disclosure at such and such a time. So, you know, it can be, it is 24/7, has to be.
I think, you know, for somebody who's not technical, you know, the fact that GDPR has really sort of changed everything. It's not just about a company being hacked and their data being taken. It's everyone else's data, and it's a PR thing for every business now, isn't it? I want to bring in, if I can, Nigel. Nigel, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm very well, thanks.
You've been around the block. So what?
Oh, that's harsh.
Listen, we're friends. I
think I'm on lap about 83.
What's your experience been, you know, in your recent career then, Nigel, when it comes to, you know, security, data breaches, things like that? And what's been your relationship with the security team, or the person that's responsible for that?
Well, it's been varied, and I think, you know, Mark's painted an understandable picture of perhaps some of the less favourable conditions for CISOs in which they work. I've been lucky enough to work in organisations that perhaps demonstrated a little more concern for these areas. But I do think, you know, the trend of both, to your point, Sam, you made about GDPR and data privacy, and I think people's general awareness in their day-to-day lives of sort of cyber and cyber threats has helped, I think, to elevate the conversation. I think to Damian's point, I think the challenge is, and I'm a trustee on a not-for-profit organisation, I think the challenge is for a lot of people, if IT is regarded as a bit of a black box, then cyber even more so. So the challenge is, I wouldn't necessarily wholeheartedly agree with Mark that in all circumstances the CISO should necessarily be reporting to the CEO. I think, you know, there is a wide range of business risks. I think the good news is that most organizations now take cyber a lot more seriously. I think they're starting to take information management, information security a lot more seriously. And I think to Andrew's point, some of the points that Mark raised are almost, they are compensating for a lack of organizational culture and process and governance that should stop some of those things ever manifesting themselves. You know, I've got a lot of sympathy for CISOs. I've recruited them. I've managed cybersecurity in a number of roles. I think the conversation always to have with the board is a very stark one about there's a curve of investment you can make, and in the opposite direction, there's a curve of risk you can influence. And really what you've got to decide is how much do you want to spend to be on what point on the risk curve? Because ultimately they're both exponential. So you can never spend enough to have zero risk, but you have got to have the board have a conversation about what's our level of investment and what level of risk, what's our risk appetite to carry. And I think that then gets you out of the kind of costs, you know, how much does it cost kind of, it's actually about what's our appetite in this business to carry risk across a broad range of things, but make sure that cyber and everything to do with cyber comes into that, and data privacy. And then it very much becomes a board decision about how much risk they're taking, not how much they're spending. And I think I found that a much more useful way of coming at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one when you talk about cost, Nigel. I almost feel like, you know, if you're on the board and somebody comes to you in the business and says, I want to invest in this new bit of technology, the board can see that they're going to get something for that investment. Whereas for security, it is all about peace of mind. The CISO or the person responsible has to be the best, you know, insurance salesperson in the world, don't they? To kind of communicate what these risks might be.
Yeah, so that's, I think it is an investment in a risk appetite. It's not a cost. And that's where you say, guys, how much risk do we want to carry? And then it's a board decision. You're not asking for money. What you're saying is, where do you want to be on this risk curve? Because we can mitigate to this degree, but it's likely to require this investment.
Yeah.
And it has an insurance effect as well. Yeah, because if you don't have the adequate security cover, your business continuity insurance is going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to you know, you will be more liable for things if you have not taken adequate precaution against them. Yeah. Yeah.
In the same way that you insure your house, and if you don't have the proper deadlocks on your windows, then your insurance is invalid. Yeah. Okay.
I do think the important conversation is, guy, you know, to a board is, we're not going to negate this. So, you know, the days of convincing the board you can build a moat and a wall and some barbed wire around the organization and prevent things has gone. You know, if either a state-sponsored or a really sophisticated organization targets you, you will not stop them.
Yeah.
And it's about having a culture in the organization where, yes, you build the protection around the most important things, but to a degree you can afford. Then you've got to be monitoring and always aware of what's going on. you've got to be able to respond and recover the situation when it happens. And you've got to go through that full life cycle and make the organization understand that. And I think that's, if I had a criticism of, I think what some CISOs and cyber positioning does, without always, and this isn't, I'm not pointing this at you, Mark, but in some of the conversations I've heard, without actually having the discussion about, well, when something does happen, how do we know it's happening? Yeah. When we do know it's happening, how the hell do we respond? Yeah. And when we do respond, how do we recover the business? Yeah. Because that's the life cycle you need to get your head around, not we can spend enough money to stop this happening.
We also see situations where the internal sales tactic by anybody in security is, oh, and that's not very, selling the or overstating the risks, because that's the only leverage they've got to get that kind of investment that's required. So yeah, mapping that against the risk appetite makes a lot of sense, because ultimately then the book can come back and say, well, you know what, we're not worried. That perspective's fine, but it doesn't really fit with what we're trying to do, and we're willing to accept that as part of the risk of operation. And all of your scare stories, you can keep them. We're not that bothered.
I guess it depends on each individual company or organisation and what they do, or how they operate, and how those systems are, functional to the organisation or the business. And
yeah. And there's an organisation called the Information Security Forum. It's actually a not-for-profit, but it's very useful, and that they have a way that you can plot your capability and look at all the sectors and make a decision about what, given the sector you're in, what level of protection you should have, and then plot yourself against people in that sector and against industries in general. And I think,
brilliant,
great point, Sam. It is all relative. And what you've got to identify is, what are your crown jewels? What are the important things you protect? And what's the reality of the risk of the threat in your environment? And that will vary from company to company, depending on all sorts of factors.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nigel. Appreciate that. Nick, I think you've got a question, or you've got something you'd like to raise?
What I found works well is looking at business continuity and disaster recovery, and making sure the focus is on those, because the overlap to security. So you can get the buy-in rather than approach it from a security angle. I was lucky enough to have witnessed the underground fire in Holborn. It took out a quarter square mile of the West End about 3 years ago. Everyone's business continuity plans failed because they weren't geared up for a week of no power.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it opened everyone's eyes that the problem doesn't have to be in your building. It can be literally half a mile down the road. And so always looking at it from security, the end goal is to get these security solutions and whatever you want in place. But sometimes only approaching it as a security issue, the answer is no. But if you approach it from disaster recovery, business continuity, gives you more ammo to fire at the board and get buy-in.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
So I've got history with Nick, so yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
I've done similar talks. I did one talking about the 9 hats of a CISO. So it was
the 9 hats of a CISO. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a big head though, so.
I think there's been a few really, really good points. I think the big thing for me seems to be there's an education piece here, and that actually, and the lights have just gone out here. There does seem to be a bit of an education piece here, and an opportunity for organisations to fully embrace what a CISO individual would do, or what a head of whether you call it disaster recovery, business continuity, risk management you mentioned earlier, Mark. I think it's raised a lot of really, really good points. Amanda, thank you for joining us. What's been your kind of experience with working in security and risk, and this kind of area for you personally?
Well, it's my first time for attending, so thank you very much. It's very nice to meet you all.
Welcome.
I'm coming at it, basically, it's been quite interesting for me because I'm coming at it, I'm an auditor. I can hear the hissing. I'm a certification body auditor. You can find who I work for on LinkedIn, obviously. So I've come at it at a level where really I was thinking about this. I'm thinking this isn't the view I'm seeing when I'm doing my work. But obviously I'm shielded. I'm shielded from that. I don't necessarily get the full picture because coming at it from an audit point of view, the client is saying everything they think I want to hear. So I'm getting, we're getting investment, we've got top management representation on management reviews, here's our business continuity plan. So it's actually really interesting to hear what you're saying because I'm not exposed to this. So it's actually a learning experience for me to actually say, actually, it might not be a true picture of what you're being presented with. So yeah, it's actually an eye-opener for me to hear all your responses. I mean, I'm not at sea level, obviously, and I haven't been at sea level, but I've owned my own business and I've done consultancy work. So for me, it's been a really good insight to hear your experience. So if there's any hints and tips you can give me
Amanda,
as an auditor on the dark
lot of
side.
really difficult questions to ask.
Yeah.
Can't just be bogged
Actually,
down.
Damian, she's just given you another hint there, which is to ask what the auditors would make of the situation. There you go.
Absolutely.
Well, I think what we'll try to do maybe is we'll put together a bit of a summary of today. The slides will obviously be available to anybody that wants to see them, but maybe we'll put together a bit of a summary, maybe, some top tips perhaps.
Definitely.
Oh, that'd be lovely, yeah.
Sam,
yes,
David.
hello. Hi, David. You all right?
Hi, yeah, fine, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm also new, so I thought it's an opportune time to follow Amanda. New to the forum. You're not alone with NetWare 3, Mark, so I could put my hand up to that. So
312.
Remember 2.15 actually, but that's going too far back. I think from
MHS, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Took forever to load. Just thinking about some of the things that were said, I mean, I agree completely with a lot of it. I think where some of the gaps are, particularly with the organizations themselves, and they all differ, obviously, but I think the correlation between their risk register, so the entire business risk, of which security is, for me, one element, depending on the sector you're in, I think there's a lack of correlation, and there seems to be I suppose fear, with cyber. I mean, as Mark said, it does, put fear into organizations in terms of trying to mitigate against it, when in reality, there is more than just the cyber risk. Cyber risk is just one element of it. And I think correlation broadly should be across the entire business, and it should include audit, because audit has findings, and findings then feeds back into the risk, and the risk and it should all correlate. So I think there are some very big gaps, but the challenge is always trying to justify that you need to mitigate against cyber risk. You shouldn't have to approach it that way. It should be a cohesive, these are the risks, how are we going to mitigate against them? And the cyber element is just part of it. And I'm saying so coming from a healthcare experience where there are far greater risk, where the consequence of cyber or any other risk that might exist could be patient harm. So the entire business case was built on the fact that we needed to be risk averse.
And that's
you need to remember as well. Sorry, Sam. One of the things you need to remember as well is that what is safe today may be easily cracked tomorrow.
Correct.
So, what you think is, I've locked it all up at the moment. That's it. Fine. No, tomorrow they come out with a better form of bolt cutter and they've got your lock off there. So.
Yeah. Listen, everyone, thank you for today. I'm conscious now we're just about to run over time. So It just obviously leaves me to say thank you to Mark for putting the presentation together. I know I put you under some pressure the other day when we had a chat to talk about this, and maybe we sort of changed the tack slightly, but I really do appreciate your time, because everybody that does these roundtable events does them for no fee, and they do it in their own time.
Hold on.
And I do really appreciate it. You know, I hope, obviously we're the rule of 6 now, but I hope at some point in the future that we might be able to take this into a real place where we can actually see people in the flesh and maybe have a beer or a wine or a water or whatever. So listen, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for attending. Really do appreciate it. These events wouldn't happen if it wasn't for people like yourself coming along and spending some time to do this. And of course, I appreciate it's after 5:30. So thank you again. Next week, we have Nigel Lemmon actually joining us with a couple of other attendees who are also CIO, CTOs, Jonathan Mortlock and also Andy Bruckhausen, who couldn't be with us today. But Andy, Nigel and Jonathan will be with us next week. And we're going to be talking about the balance in 2021 when it comes to investment in digital transformation versus maybe the obvious cost savings, and that battle and that balance from a CFO point of view and a CEO who are both battling, I guess, with the CTO to say, we want to invest, but we want to save. So that's going to be an interesting debate. So no presentation, but plenty of insight and thoughts from people that have been there and done it, been around the block, Nigel. And I'll try and curate as best as I can. So thank you for today. And the video will be available tomorrow to look at. We'll also post some updates on LinkedIn. If you've not joined the group already, drop me an email and I'll get you invited to the LinkedIn group. And thank you very much. Good evening. Enjoy the rest of your Thursdays.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. See you now. Bye-bye.